How many times have you read or heard the Beatitudes, Jesus' beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and thought to yourself, well, that's beautiful? But did you know it really applies to us today? It's more than just a surface, blessed are those who do this and do that. It goes much deeper than that. It speaks to us today in our lives right now. You know, beatitude comes from a Latin word meaning blessed or highly favored. But here's a critical thing that most people miss, and actually I missed it up until about 2 years ago. Jesus was not just giving us motivational quotes here. He was describing the kind of people who actually recognize their need for God and recognize what God produces in them. Yeah. The world, our world, sees weakness. But Jesus reveals a spiritual reality here. Now, I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to read this passage, but I want to go back and break it down and really dig into each one of these and how it applies to us right now, today. You know, this is about a spiritual transformation. Allow me to read it for a moment. Now, Jesus had just started his ministry in Galilee. And he'd been walking around and been talking with people and healing people. And a great crowd started forming around him. And it starts in Matthew chapter 5. And now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you, when people insult you, and persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in this same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. It's beautiful. And I've read that so many times. I'm sure you have too, and I'm sure you've heard it and seen it in artwork. But let's take a look, and let's break it down a little bit, shall we? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know, this is not talking about simply being financially poor. Poor in spirit means spiritually bankrupt inside. Aware of your need of God, and no longer pretending that you have yourself together spiritually. It's letting go of that false mask that we've got everything together. This is the death of spiritual pride. You know, the Pharisees thought that they were spiritually rich because they were keeping the laws and they had knowledge of the word. But Jesus starts by saying the kingdom begins with the opposite. The kingdom begins with the person who says, God, I can't save myself. I can't fix myself. I can't sustain myself without you, Lord. And that's why that came first in the Beatitudes. Because nobody genuinely walks with God while still clinging on to Now let's look at the next one. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. You know, this is deeper than just a general sadness. This mourning includes grief over sin, grief over brokenness, grief over what the world and our society has become, grief over our distance from God. You know, remember, a hardened heart doesn't mourn sin. It excuses it. But the person drawing close to God becomes more aware of their own condition. They become more aware of the pain of others. They become more aware of the weight of evil. They become more aware of the cost of the separation from God. And yet Jesus says, these people, these very people, us, we shall be comforted. Not ignored, not abandoned, but comforted. Let's continue on. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, funny thing about this is, when we see meek, we often think weakness. But biblical meekness is strength under control. It's humility without cowardice. It's power submitted to God. Moses was called meek, and yet he confronted Pharaoh. Jesus himself was called meek, and he overturned tables. You know, our world says to dominate. It says to force control. It says to crush our opponents. But Jesus says the opposite. Jesus says that the people who are truly aligned with God do not need to exalt themselves constantly. Meek people trust God with position, recognition, and justice. Continuing on, we look at blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. This is about spiritual appetite, not just a casual interest. This isn't, I should probably pray more. I should probably read my Bible more. Maybe I'll think about God someday. No. This is an internal desperation for what is right and what is true. You begin craving things like holiness. You begin craving truth. You begin craving integrity and closeness with God. You begin craving a spiritual transformation within yourself. And notice the imagery that Jesus used with this. He said hunger and thirst. Hunger and thirst. Those are survival level desires. Survival level desires. Jesus is describing someone who realizes that nothing else fully satisfies me but God. Moving on. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. People who truly understand how much they have received, how much mercy they've received, tend to become more merciful in their own lives. I know I have. Not soft on truth, but merciful. See, there's a difference there. Mercy says, I see your failure. It says, I see your humanity. But I won't treat you only by your worst moment. That's mercy. The unforgiving heart, on the other hand, often reveals someone who has never fully grasped their own need for grace in their lives. Now look at what's next. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You know, this is not about sinless perfection. Pure in heart points to sincerity of heart, undivided devotion, inner integrity. Okay? It's not about performing our spirituality externally and remaining divided in our spirituality internally. You know, Jesus constantly confronted outward religion without an inward transformation. Look at his many talks with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Purity of heart means you stop using God while living for yourself. It means your inner life and your outer life, they begin to align. And notice the promise. They shall see God. Not merely know about Him, but recognize Him. Becoming aware of Him. Walking with God. And we continue on. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called sons of God. This is not about people pleasing. Okay? Peacemaking is costly. It's very costly. Real peace often requires truth, humility. It requires courage. And often it requires restraint. You know, sometimes peace must pass through confrontation first. But Jesus isn't praising passive avoidance. He's describing people who actively bring reconciliation where division exists. That's peacemaking. And finally, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, you know, this is where modern Christianity becomes really quite uncomfortable. Jesus never promised us universal approval. Jesus never promised us an easy life when we came to God. If you genuinely live differently, look, some people are going to misunderstand you. Some are going to mock you. Some will resent the conviction that they feel when they're around you. It's not because you're arrogant. It's not because you're combative. At least I hope you're not. But because truth exposes things. We know this. Truth exposes things in our lives. You know, Jesus is saying, for righteousness is not evidence that, you know, doing this for righteousness and having people move away from you is not spiritual evidence that God has abandoned you. Sometimes it's evidence that you're actually following Him. So here's my takeaway from all this. The Beatitudes form a progression of our spiritual lives today, right now. You realize your spiritual poverty. You realize you mourn brokenness. You become more humble. You hunger for righteousness. Mercy grows inside of you. Your heart changes. You become a peacemaker. Even when the world pushes back. This is not random. It's a picture of spiritual transformation. And notice something else. The Beatitudes are almost the opposite of what our modern culture in our modern society is. You know, modern culture, modern society celebrates self-exaltation. It celebrates outrage. It celebrates dominance. It celebrates self-image. It celebrates instant gratification. It celebrates revenge. And it celebrates external success. But Jesus describes something completely different. He describes humility, surrender, mercy, a hunger for righteousness, purity, spiritual endurance. That tension is still here today, and it always will be. But the Beatitudes are more than just motivation. The Beatitudes speak of our own personal, spiritual transformation. God bless you, and have a blessed day.